If you love Rearview Mirror Chronicles podcast and want to help us keep bringing you brilliant episodes, then please share it with a friend or a fellow history fan who you think might enjoy it. Thanks for your support, and I do hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, I'm Keith Hockton. They say that we see the world in colour, but what if I told you that for most of human history, we actually didn't? In Homer's Iliad, the sea is not blue, it's wine dark. Ancient texts describe the sky not as cerulean, but as bronze or grey. Blue, as a concept, didn't exist in early human language, and when it finally did, it changed absolutely everything. Today, we take colour for granted. We see it in the clothes we wear, the flags we wave, the brands we buy, but each colour, red, yellow, green, blue, has a past that's actually soaked in ritual and trade and conquest and even deception. In this episode, we travel back through the ages to uncover a forgotten story, how our ancestors slowly learned to see color, to name it, to capture it, and ultimately to be controlled by it. From the blood red dye that funded empires to the synthetic blue that literally sparked a fashion revolution. This is not just a story of pigments and paint. No. It's a story of how we came to see the world the way we do. So take a sip of something strong, adjust your rearview mirror, and prepare for a journey into the hidden history of hues. Because once you learn where color really comes from, you'll never see the world the same way again. So I'm kicking things off with Isaac Newton. When he was young, he was obsessed with colors. So let's just rewind the clock to when Newton was just 23. The year is 1665, and he's home for Christmas, holed up in his room, doing what only Newton does best, quietly unlocking the secrets of the universe. One of the puzzles that's actually swirling around his mind at this time is color. Where does it come from? And when he sees the color red, like actually sees it, is that redness something that's in his head, or something that exists outside there in the real world? So naturally, Newton decides to do what any curious genius with a questionable judgment might do. He pokes a knife in his own eye. In his notebook, he actually wrote this: "I took a bodkin and put it betwixt my eye and the bone near the backside of my eye. As I pressed it into the flesh, several large colored circles appeared." Talk about commitment. Painful? Absolutely. Helpful? Not really. All he got out of that was a few swirling spots, so not much insight into the nature of color. But then he actually got hold of a prism, just a small pyramid-shaped piece of glass. Not easy to come by in 1600, so maybe he actually even made it himself. Newton then darkened his room completely, shutting all the blinds. Then he poked a tiny hole in one of them, just big enough for a single beam of sunlight, and then he waited. When the sun reached the right position in the sky, a shaft of light cut through the darkness of his room. Newton then held up the prism to the beam, and suddenly a rainbow appeared on the wall, or as Newton described it in his diary, a colored image of the sun. Now, that's pure magic, isn't it? A colored image of the sun. Victoria Finlay wrote a brilliant book about color, and she makes a point that's easy to miss, but really, really important. She said that in Newton's day, people believed white light was actually sacred. It was seen as something pure, something divine, a gift from God, if you like, or at the very least, a perfect product of nature. The light of the sun wasn't just an illumination, it was actually holy. So when a prism threw a rainbow onto the wall, which, yes, people already knew prisms could do, they didn't assume the colors were actually in the light. They thought the colors actually came from within the prism itself. The idea was that the prism, being imperfect, added its own impurities to the holy white light of the sun. The rainbow was a distortion, not a revelation. And Newton actually wasn't sure whether that was true. So he built himself a second prism, and this is where things get really, really clever. While the first prism was still casting its rainbow, Newton then stepped a few feet back and held up the second prism in the blue section of the spectrum. He wanted to know, would the second prism change the blue light? Would it split it further, or mix it up, or make something completely new? What he saw was nothing. The blue stayed blue. No change, no distortion, no added color, which told him something huge. If the blue light wasn't being altered by the second prism, then maybe the first prism hadn't altered it either. Maybe that spectrum, that rainbow, was already there, inside the white light. This was an amazing breakthrough. He realized that the prism wasn't crafting color, it was actually revealing color. White light, the thing thought to be pure and simple, was actually a mixture of all colors. The colors weren't in the glass. They were actually in the light. They are the light. And suddenly, light wasn't just some divine glow from above. It was actually physical. It could be tested, it could be taken apart, it could be studied. And Newton's prism experiment marked the start of something enormous. From that moment on, we were on the path to discovering ultraviolet rays, X-rays, radio waves. Everything we understand today about light began with that beam splitting in his darkened room. That sliver of rainbow, pouring from his prism. It actually helped us figure out the greenhouse effect. It told us what stars are made of. It even gave us clues about the age of the universe itself. All from one tiny ray of light. Not a bad holiday project, huh? Interestingly, not everyone was thrilled by Newton's discovery. John Keats, the Romantic poet, was furious, and he accused Newton of stripping all the poetry from the rainbow. To Keats, turning a rainbow into wavelengths and angles was like taking a beautiful painting and trying to explain it with chemistry, trying to take the paints apart to tell you how you got to that amazing painting. And what he believed was that by dissecting beauty, you actually killed it. And, you kind of get where he's coming from. There's something about analyzing, things to the nth degree that can actually feel a little bit deflating. You put it down so precisely that it actually stops being magical. It can't grow or become something new because science has actually put an upper limit on what it is and what it can be. Now, of course, without science, we wouldn't be where we are today. But it is an interesting tension. And it wasn't just Keats who challenged Newton's view of color. Another poet, this time the German writer Goethe, had a very different idea. One day, Goethe is out walking in the park. It's early spring. He notices a patch of yellow crocuses in bloom, vivid golden petals, basking in the morning light. And he admires them. He takes them all in, and then he turns his head rather quickly. And suddenly, just for a second, he sees violet. Not the flower itself, just a flash of violet where the yellow had been, if not a millisecond before. The shape was the same, but the color had changed. It hadn't come from outside him. He hadn't rubbed his eyes or stared at the sun too long. He just saw violet out of nowhere. And that moment sparked something special because yellow and violet are complementary colors. They're opposites. Goethe realized the violet wasn't coming from the world outside. It was actually coming from inside his mind. And we've all had this experience, right? You close your eyes and you see the colors dancing. If you press lightly on your eyelids, sometimes you see little fireworks of color going off. And these aren't hallucinations. They're part of how our mind processes vision. Goethe's simple moment in the park led him to ask, what if color doesn't just exist out there in the world? What if it actually starts out there, but then finishes its journey inside our head? And here's the thing. Hundreds of years later, we're still asking that very important question. Science can actually tell us that color has an objective reality. Wavelengths, energy, protons, the experience of color. That's incredibly personal. It's subjective. One person's red might not quite be another's red. In fact, there may be no such thing as a truly objective view of color, if truth be told. And me, I actually like holding both ideas in my head at once. Color is out there, but it's also in here. That's me pointing to my head. So, where is color? Is it out there in the world, or is it in here? Is it inside our minds? That's the question we're about to explore through the eyes of a butterfly, with a woman who might see colors the rest of us can only dream about, and even through a time when people said the sea looked like dark red wine. We, ladies and gentlemen, are about to get colorful. So, neuroscientists have a few fascinating things to say about color. One of the big debates is this: where exactly is color? When you're holding a strawberry in your hand, is it red in some universal sense? Is it red for every single thing that sees it? A bee, a whale, an elephant? Or does it only become red when it hits our brain? Think about it this way. If an alien landed here tomorrow, would they see that same strawberry as red? And the answer, almost 100%, is no. Even your dog wouldn't see it as red, because dogs don't have our kind of color vision. Their world is actually made up of blue and yellow and black and white, nothing in the red spectrum. Roughly 10% of men are colorblind, and that gives us a clue. People who are colorblind don't just see in black and white. That's a fallacy. They do see color. They just don't see as much color as someone who's not colorblind sees. Their colors actually blur together, and they look a little bit duller, and the range is a little bit narrower. So imagine this: a dog, a human, and a cow all staring at a rainbow. Are they all seeing the same thing? No, not even close. You probably remember the old rainbow acronym from school. I still remember it. Richard of York gains battle in vain. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. And that's basically the colors of the spectrum. That's our human rainbow. 7 incredibly bold bands of color. Now, a dog's vision is very different. They start out seeing blue, that's no problem. Then it fades to green, and then it just kind of stops. Maybe they catch a whisper of yellow. That's about it. Their rainbow is about half as thick as ours, half the colors, half the wow, if you like. We like to think that all creatures see the same world, but we really, really don't. And why is that? Because it's all in the eye. Dogs are actually missing one crucial thing: the red sensitive cone. Humans actually have 3 types of cones in our eyes: blue, green, and red. Dogs just have 2, blue and green. Now, that might not sound like a big deal. It's just 1 extra cone, right? But it actually is a big deal, because with that 3rd cone, suddenly the red can mix with blue to make purple, or with yellow to make orange. Green and blue makes turquoise. That 1 cone gives us access to an explosion of color that dogs can't see. In fact, by adding just that 1 extra photo figment, we don't just get 1 more color, we actually get 98 more colors. So then I sat there wondering about birds. What about sparrows? Turns out sparrows actually have ultraviolet vision. Their rainbow actually starts before ours. Where we just see blank sky, they actually see ultraviolet light, a whole color we can't even imagine. Then they move through to violet, to blue, to green, to orange, to red, and then beyond. Their red cones are actually more sensitive than ours, so they can actually see deeper into the red spectrum than we can. So their rainbow starts earlier, it ends later, and for a sparrow, it actually burns so much brighter. There's so much more color. So then I was wondering, does that actually make the sparrow the champion of color? Maybe, but then butterflies came to mind. We humans have 3 kinds of color receptors in our eyes. So just remember that, just the 3. Butterflies actually have 5, sometimes even 6, which means they don't just see more colors than we do. They see more colors than we even have names for. If a butterfly looked at a rainbow, it would see ultraviolet first, beyond what we can see. Then it would see violet, and then blue, and then shades of blue-green, and green blue, and then yellowish green. Basically, entire worlds of color sandwiched between the bands that we see just as green or blue. Their eyes are super complex. So I then wondered, with that in mind, do butterflies actually wear the color vision crown? Not quite. Because when you dive beneath the waves under coral reefs, you meet the real champion of color, the mantis shrimp. Now, if you've never seen one, picture a creature that looks like a cross between a technicolored lobster and a praying mantis. Some are finger-sized, others are as big as your forearm. And they are gorgeous, electric, turquoise, iridescent greens and reds and oranges. I'm literally looking at a photo of one right now, which is great for a podcast, I know. But imagine something that looks like it was designed by a rave DJ. And their eyes, massive, cartoon-like. They sit right at the front of the head, always watching, always scanning. So, remember, dogs have 2 cones. Humans have 3 cones. Butterflies have 5 or 6, depending on the species. And keep in mind, there's over 17,000 species of butterfly. But mantis shrimp, they have 16 different types of photoreceptors. 16! So, what does a rainbow look like to a mantis shrimp? Well, first, yes, they can see rainbows. They live in shallow water, clear tropical waters, so sunlight actually passes through very easily. And of course, their underwater world is very rich and alive with color. Just for a second, imagine their rainbow. Where we begin with violet, they begin with deep ultraviolet, then multiple shades of ultraviolet, 5 or 6 distinct visions of a color that we can't even see, that we don't have names for. Then they hit violet, then blue, then deeper blues, then greens, then reds, moving through layers and layers of color that are absolutely invisible to us. Their visual system is the most complex of any creature on Earth, by a factor of 2 or maybe even more. So if we're handing out crowns for color perception, the mantis shrimp isn't just wearing it. That shrimp built the throne room. But here's the catch. Mantis shrimp may have the most advanced eyes on the planet, but their brains, tiny. So who knows, maybe they can't even appreciate the beauty of a rainbow the way we do, because they don't need to. Maybe for them, it's all just data. And honestly, they're not exactly known for their emotional depth. What they are known for is violence. They are the marine gladiators personified. They kill crabs, they kill other mantis shrimp, they kill small octopuses. Yeah, it's true, they can actually smash through the glass of an aquarium with one single punch. They are the Mike Tyson of the sea. And they're armed with hyperspectral vision and stunningly iridescent themselves. Enter Justin Marshall, a marine biologist, a neuroscientist, and he works on the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, a place that I've actually dived many, many times, and I've seen the mantis shrimp out there. Justin was actually the first to seriously investigate their color vision. And this was back in the mid-90s when he was at the University of Sussex. And the way he made the discovery, it's a fantastic story. So one day, a colleague from West Africa walks into the lab wearing a bright traditional dress, absolutely bursting with color. And she strolled past the aquariums where the mantis shrimp are kept, and the place erupts into a frenzy of activity. The mantis shrimps actually rush to the front of their tanks. They're waving their arms, they're flashing their colors along their bodies, and they're putting on what can only be described as a full-blown mating display. They are completely sexually turned on, and he described it as some kind of shrimp nightclub. That's how much iridescence was flashing in these tanks. That moment told Justin something important, that they weren't just reacting to movement because they'd seen him move back and forth literally all the time. What they were seeing was color, and not just the colors we see, they were seeing colors way beyond that. But here's the twist. Even though the mantis shrimp have these incredible eyes, they don't use them the same way that we use ours. And this is where we need to really think about color, what it is, and how we experience it. Because the truth is, you don't actually see color with your eyes. Your eyes take in the light, absolutely. But the experience of color, that happens in your brain. So take this. Let's say you're walking down the street and you see someone wearing a blue sweater. Your blue photoreceptors in your eyes get excited. If that sweater also has a bit of red in it, your red receptors fire off too, but maybe not as much. Now, your brain looks at the ratio of how excited each receptor is. Blue, a lot; red, a little, and it fills in the blanks. It says, a lot of blue, a touch of red, that's actually magenta. Your brain basically paints in the gaps, and that's how almost every animal on Earth sees color, except for the mantis shrimp. They do it completely differently. The thing is, the mantis shrimp's brain doesn't seem all that interested in filling in the gaps like ours does. So when we say earlier that, it sees this glorious, ecstatic, kind of full throttle rainbow, the most vibrant visual spectrum on Earth, it does. But we need to dial that back just a little bit, because while the mantis shrimp do see colors that we can't even imagine, they might not be seeing as many colors as we imagine they see. Instead of a seamless rainbow, their world actually might be more like a sequence of, discrete focused bands, sharp kind of slices of color without a lot in between. Yes, they've got this incredible visual hardware, but they don't use it like us. It turns out all those extra receptors aren't for, kind of marveling at sunsets. They're for talking. Mantis shrimps actually communicate in color. They flash colors at each other, quick pulses of ultraviolet, bursts of iridescence, and those signals mean things. And keep in mind, they're also showing colors that we can't see. And here's the other thing. A certain shade of color that they show another shrimp might mean back off. Another might mean come mate with me. Another could say you're home, you're safe. And just to complicate things further, there are over 500 species of mantis shrimp. And get this, each one has its own visual dialect. They're not seeing the world just to appreciate its beauty. They're seeing it to interact with it. They've evolved this technicolor vocabulary to survive, to breed, to hunt, and to stake out territory. And get this, it gets even stranger. Some species of mantis shrimp actually see polarized light. Polarized light is actually kind of tricky to explain, but in simple terms, it's like seeing patterns in light waves that are completely invisible to us. And certain shrimp can produce polarized light, flashing secret signals to each other that other animals, other predators, can't actually detect. They are, in every sense, unbelievably different from anything else on the planet. And of course, then the question begs, why? Well, biologists and neuroscientists have been asking that for over 30 years, and they still don't know. It's one of those evolutionary mysteries. Why would a creature with such a tiny brain evolve the most complex visual system on Earth? And of course, that leads us to the amazing concept of Umwelt. It's a German word, and it means the unique sensory world that each creature lives in. Every animal experiences reality through its own Umwelt, its own bubble of perception, right? So a bat lives in echoes, a bloodhound lives in smells, a mantis shrimp lives in flashes of color and polarized light. And the truth is, we will never know what the world actually looks like through their eyes. We can try, we can simulate it, we can build, diagrams and models that try and show it. But unless you're actually that animal, you will never fully understand what it's like to be them. And honestly, that actually happens between humans. So how many times have you actually said to a friend, that's not blue? And they go, yeah, it is. And then you're left wondering if it's actually blue or not. But here's the thing, we don't all see the same thing. And speaking of color differences, scientists have been experimenting with ways to add color perception. And there's this wild bit of research where they actually inject a serum into the eyes of kind of colorblind monkeys. These monkeys that normally can't see red, but after the injection, suddenly they can. Now imagine that, a whole new color appearing in your world, just like that. And what it does is it actually helps them spot red fruit, which was previously to them invisible. And yeah, look, theoretically, the same could be done for colorblind humans. It hasn't actually been approved for humans yet, but one day it might. And imagine that changing someone's world. So, with that serum idea still rattling around in your head, what if we could take it one step further? Could scientists one day inject something into us which actually lets us see what mantis shrimp see? In theory, totally. But hang on to that thought, because believe it or not, there are already color mutants, color human mutants walking among us. So here's the story. The genes that code for the color receptors in your eyes, the ones that help you see green and blue, live on the X chromosome. Now, men, as you know, only have one X, but women, they've actually got two, which means women have two sets of those cone-making genes. Most of the time, one of those sets just kind of hangs out as a backup. It's no big deal. But someone somewhere had this wild idea. What if in some women that second set of genes actually switches on, or maybe on the whole time? What if it creates a fourth cone in that woman's eye? Enter the so-called yellow cone. People with normal vision are actually called trichomats and have three cones. Me, I'm a trichomat. I have red, green, and blue. But a woman with a fourth cone, she would actually be called a tetramat. She would have blue, green, and red, and she would have yellow. Now, this doesn't mean that she sees more yellow. It means that her yellow cone mixes with the other cones to produce an entirely new dimension of color. And this is so exciting because we're actually talking about not just thousands, but maybe millions of shades of color that the rest of us can't even conceive of. Technicolor doesn't even cover it. It's like super duper spectral something. So naturally, scientists started looking for these women. And here's the fun part. They actually figured out that you can actually test for this through a simple DNA scan. Just check the blood, see if someone's carrying the genetic material for all four cones. And guess what? They found someone. And she actually worked in the same lab. A total coincidence. They looked at her DNA and boom, she had the fourth gene for the fourth cone. So they devised an experiment. They set up two lights, both the exact same yellow to the trichromatic eyes. But of course, if you're a tetrachromat, the question then is, can you use that cone? You should be able to, and they should look completely different. The two lights should look completely different. So they brought her in and they had a look at both the lights and they said, what do you see? Do you see any difference? And she looked and she paused and she said, no, they look both the same. I can only imagine deep sighs all round. But of course, the story doesn't end there. A colleague of theirs at Newcastle University in the UK, Gabrielle Jordan, found 8 more women with that fourth cone. Out of the 8, 7 were like the first that I just described to you. They were genetically gifted, but visually average. But one woman looked at those same 2 yellow lights and said, without hesitation, they're totally different. She could actually use her fourth cone. She was seeing things that we couldn't see. So how does that happen? What's going on? Why could she see it when the others couldn't? I say, here's the theory with authority. This is my theory. Imagine if you grow up in a world with no color. Everything is black and white. The houses, the clothing, the TV, makeup is just dark or light. Even if you had the potential to see color, you never actually use it because everything's black and white. And if you never use it, you then don't know that that other cone is there. Now imagine one day, out of nowhere, a bright red apple drops into your world. Question is, would you recognize it for what it is? Or would it just be, a weird looking object? Maybe that's what's happening with women who carry the fourth cone. They have the biological wiring, but unless they're constantly exposed to colors that stimulate that cone, well, then it's just going to lie dormant. It's not going to be used. And here's the kicker. Everything we create, our screens, our printers, our paints, it's actually built for trichromats. Nothing we've made in the modern world is actually designed for someone with 4 cones. Isn't that astounding? But maybe, just maybe, if a woman works in color, let's say she's a florist or a painter or a textile artist, someone who really pays attention to subtle shifts and tones, then her brain over time should learn to unlock that hidden dimension. It's not just about having the hardware, it's about being able to use the hardware. So here's how they tested this woman with this mysterious 4th cone. The plan actually started with something simple. Take little pieces of brown fabric. To the scientists, every swath of fabric looked identical. But to Susan, the woman in question, they looked the same too. But of course they weren't. Each had tiny, subtle differences. And if she really was a functioning tetramat, she'd be able to pick them out, right? So still in the lab, in lab settings, under those lights, she couldn't see any difference. So then they took the experiment outside into her garden, where she's surrounded by trees in natural light, and they tried it again. The scientists actually pulled out 3 clothes swaths, 2 identical, one ever so slightly different, and they asked her what she saw. Without hesitation, she pointed to number 3 and said, "That's the more neutral one. It has less red." The scientist in question then turned his back, shuffled these swaths, added another one, and presented them again. Same result. She picked out the odd one instantly. Then he made all 3 swaths different, each with only the slightest variation, and handed them to her once more. And you know what? She absolutely nailed it. Where everyone else saw identical colors, she actually could pick out the distinctions, the nuance, the tones. And then came a moment that was almost poetic. It was a clear blue day, not a cloud in the sky. She was staring up and completely focused, eyes locked on the heavens. And one of the scientists asked her what she was looking at. And she paused and she said, "I see a lot of pink in the blue. And there's also red in that blue." And with that, every single scientist looked up and they saw nothing but plain blue, pure textbook, cloudless blue. And they asked again, "Where exactly is the red?" And she looked at them all and she said, "It's mixed through the entire sky. It's everywhere." And in that moment, every single one of them suddenly felt like their sky was very flat, boring, lacking. And what they wanted was her amazing sky. Now, that moment, seeing something that no one else can see leads us to another kind of vision, the way language might shape perception. There's a fascinating book I came across called Through the Language of Glass by Guy Deutscher. And he's that rare being. He's that rare thing. He's an academic who actually makes sense. And even better, what I love about him is that he's playful about it. He's thoughtful. He's provocative. All the things that I love. In the book, he actually explores a big, beautiful idea that the language you speak doesn't just reflect your culture, it shapes how you think and perhaps even how you see. And here's where it gets really interesting for me. Deutscher tells a story that begins in 1858 with none other than William Gladstone, the towering figure of British politics, 4 times prime minister in the 19th century, absolutely famous for his oratory, his reforms, his curiosity, his obsession with Homer, which was the thing that really astounded me. Gladstone was also a deeply religious man, and for him, the Iliad and the Odyssey were almost sacred texts, and he read them every single day. I'm not exaggerating. They were like scripture to him. They were like a second limb. But it's what he noticed in Homer that set off a whole new kind of debate. What started as a kind of strange literary fascination early in his career actually turned into something much bigger. He set out to write the definitive history of Homer. Not one book, but 3 sprawling volumes, thousands of pages, examining everything about Homer's language, imagery, worldview. And in the process, he actually noticed something really, really weird. It was about Homer's use of color. Now, the most famous example is probably the wine dark sea. It's odd, right? It's odd to describe a sea as wine dark. Seas aren't usually described as wine-colored, but it doesn't stop there. Homer actually describes oxen as wine-colored as well. He says that the sheep in his fields are violet. His iron kettle is also violet. He describes honey as being green. Forests, not green. No, he never calls them green. Everywhere Gladstone looked, the colors were just off. They were wrong. Wrong for the object, wrong for reality. And it completely puzzled him. So he did what any good Victorian obsessed with order might do. He started counting. He went through the Iliad and the Odyssey line by line, tallying every reference to color. Black and white, he found them 270 times. Red, 13. Yellow and green, 10 mentions each. He then made a discovery which completely blew his mind. Blue, not mentioned once. Not a single mention in the entire book. In all of Homer's epic works, there is no blue. Not the sky, not the ocean, not the robes of the gods, nothing. Gladstone then drew a very bold conclusion. Homer must have been colorblind. But here's the really exciting news. Not just Homer, all ancient Greeks, he argued, must have been colorblind. They actually lived in a world of black and white with the occasional flicker of red. Gladstone then took it further. What if human beings didn't always see the full color spectrum? What if, and this is a theory, generation by generation, we developed the ability to see more and more? Gladstone imagined that color vision evolved not just biologically, but culturally. That over the course of 3,000 years, people went from seeing mostly light and dark to the full rainbow that we know today. But when he published this theory, people actually thought that he'd lost the plot. That is, until about 10 years later, when another scholar picked up on his thread. Lazarus Geiger, a philologist, that's a kind of a linguist, but kind of more focused on ancient texts, started digging through literature from literally all over the world. He looked at the Icelandic sagas. He looked at ancient Chinese poetry. He looked at the Vedic hymns from India. He looked at the original Bible and, of course, the Torah. And guess what he found? The same pattern. Blue is not mentioned anywhere. So Geiger wanted to figure out, when did blue actually show up in our language? And he started tracing its first appearance across languages and cultures. And what he found was absolutely astounding. Every language, no matter where in the world, begins with the same core colors, black and white. Next to appear is red, then comes yellow, followed by green, and blue always arrives last. Always. It's universal. Now that's kind of odd, right? It's like, why is red always first and why is blue always last? Look, I guess one reason might be that in Homer's world, blue was practically non-existent. There were no blue foods, there were no blue plants, and even truly blue flowers, the ones that we actually see today, they're incredibly rare in nature. And the few that do exist, well, they certainly didn't grow in ancient Greece. Most of the vibrant blue flowers that we see today have been genetically modified. Blue eyes were rare too. So maybe Homer didn't describe blue because he simply never saw blue. And as Geiger put it, you don't need a name for a color until you need that color. Red, that's a color you need. It's the color of blood, it's the color of danger, it's the color of fire. And it's easy to make. Just grind up some ochre clay and you've got a crayon, a red crayon. And we've actually been painting in red for over 60,000 years. But blue? Blue is actually chemically incredibly complicated. It's hard to extract, it's hard to preserve, and outside of the sky, in Homer's time, it's just not around. And here's the part that really blows my mind. Remember all those ancient texts, Homer, the Vedas, the sagas, the Bible, none of them mention blue. There is actually just one that mentions blue, and it comes from the Egyptians. They were the only ancient civilization on Earth that actually had a word for blue. They made blue. They painted with blue. They wore blue. And to this day, no one actually knows why they had it. No one else did. So Gladstone's wild theory that people in the ancient world were, in a way, colorblind suddenly doesn't seem so wild. Maybe it wasn't about biology. Maybe it was more about language, about what we notice and what we name. But let's talk about the biggest, most obvious blue thing to all of us, the sky. That enormous, stunning expanse above our heads. You'd think that would be the first thing that humans ever described as blue, but apparently not. There was an experiment done with toddlers, 3-year-olds. These kids were taught every basic color, red, green, yellow, even blue, but they were never told that the sky was blue. And then teachers took them to the outside and asked them to name the colors. What did they see? And they started pointing to trees and to grass and to flowers. And finally, the teacher pointed to the sky and said, "What color is that?" None of the kids could answer. They actually didn't know what they were being asked. It was as if there was nothing there. There was no color. It wasn't even a thing. And this went on for weeks. Every day they were taken outside and asked again and again. And eventually, one of the kids said, "It's white." And that answer stuck for a while. Then after nearly 2 months, another child finally said blue. But even then, they didn't stick to it. Some days it was white, other days back to blue. It was as if they were still learning to see the sky. Not just name it, but actually see it. So did they eventually decide? Yes. Eventually the kids settled on blue. But it took time for their minds to link a name to something so vast, so ever-present, that had it almost disappeared into the background, no one would have been surprised. And then suddenly, Homer's world starts to make sense. He probably never saw a truly blue object in his life, aside from the sky and the sea. And even then, he may not have seen them the way we do. The fact that he never lost sleep over this, that he didn't seem to find it odd, well, that just seems strange now, but not then. Because here's the thing. The world isn't what we see. It's what we've learned to see. And there's so much out there that we don't see, we don't notice, or we simply don't have the language for yet. There are so many colors that we can't see that other species do see. And I think that really blows my mind. We think of color as something fixed and objective, but it's actually this living, shifting experience that changes with culture, with science, with time. And I'm pretty sure that a year from now, we'll actually learn something new, some previous invisible aspects of color that will blow our minds all over again. And it's one of the things that I love about color. The world of color is still unfolding in front of us. We just have to learn how to see it. Thanks for listening in, folks. Bye for now.